Hello, and welcome to this brief session on how to write a research problem. This topic is at the heart of every research project, how to write a research problem. So whether you are putting together a thesis, a dissertation, or you are just writing an academic paper, it is important that you clearly define what your research problem is, because that is a very first step if you want to have a successful PhD, a successful MPhil, or a successful research paper. Okay. Now, I want to pose the question, what is a research problem? First thing first, we need to understand what the research problem is. You can think of the research problem maybe as the why behind your study. It is the gap in knowledge. It is also the unanswered question or the issue that your research is trying to address. So without a well-defined research problem, your research would be very directionless. There will be no direction. So that is why it is important that we pay particular attention to how we can come up with a solid research problem. So the question is, how do we find and articulate this research problem? The first thing we need to do is to start talking about something that is very fundamental, and that is how you start with the introduction of your research problem. And as I have indicated, whether you are working on a thesis, a dissertation, or any academic paper, it all begins with this. So why does it matter? Why does it matter? I indicated earlier that it is basically the why behind your study. But we also need to look at the how. Why is introducing your research problem very fundamental? Why is it very important? Now, I want you to think of it as the foundation of your study. And if you think of it that way, it helps a lot in understanding some of the things we are going to be discussing. It is important because it sets the stage for you. It also provides you the context and helps you to understand why your research is very important. It will also help your audience to understand why your research is very important. So when you are writing a research problem, if you don't have a very strong introduction, your research can feel a bit disconnected, or it may be a bit unclear. So the critical thing is, how then do you start? How do you start? Now, the first step is to try as much as possible to situate your research within a broader context. Situate it within a broader context. What does this mean? It means zooming out and looking at the bigger picture. So, for example, if you are researching, say, artificial intelligence, you might start by talking about how AI has transformed industries like healthcare, education, finance, and what have you. This way, it will help your audience to understand the various landscapes you are trying to work in. Once you have set the stage, it is now time for you to highlight the general area of interest. And this general area of interest, this is where you tell your audience which aspect of the broader topic you are actually focusing on and why it is so important for you. So, for instance, you might say something like, while AI has brought incredible advancements, it is an ethical or is ethical implications is still a very contentious issue. And this not only narrows the focus, but also it gives a hint at the significance of your research issue. So if you look at the example we have here, then an example of how you can introduce your research problem is to say, in the instance of the AI in healthcare, you can have an introduction like, the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence has transformed industries, yet its ethical implications remain a contentious issue in contemporary discourse. Okay. Now, when you have done this, the next, and when I say when you have done this, the first thing actually we are doing here is trying to have a very good introduction. The next thing you will need to do after the introduction is to identify the gap in knowledge. Identify the gap in knowledge. Actually, this is where you try to pinpoint what is missing in the existing literature. And then you try to explain why your research is needed. Your engagement with the existing literature and explaining why your research is important is very critical. So in as much as we are trying to understand the how and the why, it is important that we do this together. So the question you may ask is, why is it so important to identify a gap in knowledge after the introduction? It is important because research is all about we trying to build on what others have done, what is already known. So if you don't know what has already been done out there by other researchers, the risk is that you will be reinventing the wheel, or you will be studying something that's already been done. So identifying the gap ensures that your research is very original. It also ensures that your research is relevant, and then you'll be able to contribute something new to your field. Now, there are quite a number of steps you can go through to be able to identify the gap in knowledge. The first thing you can do is to try to summarize the existing literature. And then after doing that summarization, you then try to articulate what the gap is. You then try to articulate the gap is. So for instance, in this particular example, and I will just read it out. The indication is that while numerous studies have examined the technical capabilities of AI, and basically what we're doing here is to try to acknowledge the fact that a lot has been done in terms of examining the technical capabilities of AI. Then it goes, there is limited research on how ethical frameworks are integrated into AI development process, particularly in non-Western context. When you have identified and stated your gap this way, the next thing you have to do is to try to define the specific problem. You have to define the specific problem. Why is it so important to define the specific problem? It is important because a well-defined problem will give your research a direction. It will give it a focus, and it will also help you to stay on track, and it will ensure that your study is manageable and then and meaningful. So technically, without a specific problem, your research can feel very overwhelming. You will not be sure exactly what you are trying to do, and you may feel that everything is just scattered all over the place. To ensure that you define a specific problem, you have to try to narrow the focus. That's the first step. You try to narrow the focus. You identify the specific problem by narrowing the focus. Basically, you see that in the introduction, you start with your broad area of interest, and then you zoom in on a specific issue or a question. So in this example, we present an example of how we define a specific problem. So we say, this study addresses the lack of understanding regarding how cultural and ethical values influence AI development practices in emerging economies. We will focus on Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, when you have defined a specific problem, the next would be for you to justify the significance of the problem. You have to justify. Why is it important? It is important because research takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort, and it will also lead to the consumption of a lot of resources. So you need to be able to convince your audience. You need to be able to convince your supervisory team. You need to be able to convince your supervisory committee. Whether, even sometimes when you are under a scholarship, the significance of the problem, you need to be able to justify that to satisfy the funding body that is funding you. So you have to be able to indicate that your study is worth funding, or your study is worth pursuing, by clearly justifying the significance of the problem. You can do that also in a number of steps. You can do that by clearly explaining why the problem is worth investigating. And then you try to highlight the theoretical, the practical, the social implications. You have to try to do that. You need to highlight the implications of your research also very clearly. For a PhD, it is important that you try to highlight the theoretical implications as well as the practical implications of your study. Then we look at this example. Understanding the interplay between cultural values and AI ethics is crucial for developing inclusive and globally applicable ethical guidelines, which can mitigate risk of bias and discrimination in AI systems. When you have been able to justify the significance of the research problem, the next thing you do is to provide a statement that tries to link your research objectives and questions with what you have done previously. So you need to be able to transition from the problem you have indicated to your research goals. And then you state clearly how your study will address the identified gap. And a typical example in doing so is to indicate that this research aims to explore how cultural norms shape ethical decision-making in AI development teams and proposes a framework for integrating diverse ethical perspectives into AI design process. The moment you are able to link the research questions, the research objectives to your problem, the moment you are able to link the two, then you can then conclude on your research problem. You conclude. And the conclusion part, you will briefly outline the scope of your study. In other words, you need to be able to tell what will your study cover, what will it not cover. And then you provide a reassurance to the readers, to your audience, that the problem is researchable within the constraints of your PhD project. And a typical example would be to say or to write, while the study focuses on Ghana, its findings are expected to contribute to broader discussions on global AI ethics. The research is feasible given access to industry professionals and existing literature on AI development. When you have done this, and when you follow this systematic process, you will be able to come up with a very concrete research problem as indicated. So what I have done here is to bring the pieces of the different examples I have presented into one coherent research problem section for your proposal or for your thesis. Now, there are some key steps I think we need to consider when we're writing the research problem section. In writing the research problem section, you always try to be what? Very specific, be specific. Try to avoid any vague language or overly broad statements. You should also rely a lot on what? Evidence. You always have to try to support your claims with references to what? Existing literature. And then you go straight to the point. Be articulate, be concise, and make sure that the problem is indicated without any unnecessary detail. And then last but not the least, you align with your research. Ensure that the problem logically leads to your research questions and objectives. This last part is very important because we indicated earlier that your problem and your research questions and your research objectives need to be properly linked. Otherwise, there will be a clear disconnect. When you follow this structure, you would be able to craft a very compelling research problem section that will set the stage for a very good PhD thesis or dissertation. Thank you.